Thank you, Marcia. I'm always so honored to be invited to do the spoken word here. And I'm also grateful to Bill for bringing up the importance of tomorrow's date. That song, in fact, by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Ohio, it's been in recent times quite an inspiration for me as our country has been struggling with so much. I think that's the case for a lot of people. So my focus is on how we think about resistance, and this is a paper that, well, this is a version of a paper that I got accepted for a conference coming up later this year, which is sponsored by the Journal of Resistance Studies. Okay, I don't want to give like an academic paper here, so I'm going to try to talk about things in a more sort of down-to-earth way. Okay, in the times we're in, the significance of resistance is obviously quite clear. The value of resistance has always been central to how this congregation understands itself. And today, in keeping with the spirit of existentialism, I'd like for us to think about what it means to make the choice to be a resistor, what that really means. Okay, though this may seem obvious, in the wider world, I think the absence of reflection regarding this matter has actually been a bit problematic. Specifically to me, it seems that our common conception of a resistor is overly narrow insofar as it is invariably tied to responding to what others do, as well as to achieving the right kind of tangible results, like electoral wins or policy changes, which are, of course, important, but they can't be everything when it comes to making the choice to be a resistor. Okay, when we think of who is a resistor, we invariably think of someone who is reacting or changing the outside world, who's reacting to or changing the outside world. As a result, we actually seem to needlessly delay doing the kinds of work which we should have been doing all along, as well as place too much importance on outcomes that we really have no control over when assessing the value of being a resistor. When discussing works that deal with resistance, it's common for us to mention books like Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny, Lessons for the 20th Century, or Eric McBay's 2-volume Full Spectrum Resistance, which are great works, by the way. I don't deny that these are important works for our times. However, I recently learned of a title that may be even more relevant to how we should think of resistance. This is Start in Your Own Backyard by Stephen Nygren. In his book, Nygren elaborates on something he calls a biophilic design, which is a community building movement he started that is exemplified right here in Georgia by the Serenity experimental community. Biophilic design incorporates principles typically ignored by urban planners, like the designing of walkable streets and the prioritizing of clean energy. Notably, the term biophilic design, unlike terms like walkout and boycott, hardly connotes resistance or anything commonly associated with resistance. The principles Nygren advocates, however, parallel those underlying the self-reliant, decentralized village republics that Gandhi, who is, of course, revered as one of history's greatest resistors, sought to establish. Insofar as Start in Your Own Backyard encourages us to overcome the seemingly natural inner tendencies like complacency that underlie our avoidance of constructive action, it makes sense to think of it as having a serious place in the resistance literature. It seems that resistance is in fact most valuable when it's directed not toward others, but toward negative tendencies we find within ourselves. In discussing the book's central message, Nygren told the AJC, We need to stop focusing on what we can't control and start by creating change in our own sphere of influence, one backyard at a time. When we think about what is really keeping us from doing the kinds of things Nygren encourages, we cannot avoid recognizing certain inner deficiencies within us. It seems to follow then that the real targets of our resistance are not outside us, but within our very selves, the realm in which we also happen to exercise our most control. When unjust laws are imposed or segments of our population are being mistreated, of course we should rise up and take action. We should not, however, think that that is only or even mainly the kinds of situations in which resistance is important. Nygren calls on us to move away from the pursuit of large sweeping policy changes in ways that are reminiscent of the teachings of Gandhi. In regard to the so-called village republics, Gandhi declared, "Any village can become such a republic today without much interference from the present government, whose sole effective connection with the village is the execution of village revenue. Here is perfect democracy based upon individual freedom." Regarding efforts to establish village republics, Gandhi further stated, "For the sake of efficiency, we should not mix up constructive work with political propaganda. The growth of initiative and self-confidence through constructive organization will in its own time bear political consequences. There need not be any hurry for achieving quick results in the usual sense of the term political, when the masses have gained so much in self-development that they can see a wrong and are able to remedy it principally by their own nonviolent effort, then the resistance becomes natural and of the right type." Both Nygren and Gandhi's words indicate an awareness of resistance that's clearly missing in contemporary protest movements. In comparing today's movements to the early 20th century nonviolent resistant movement in India, historian David Hardiman writes, "Capturing state power and transforming a society through the work of a constitutional government that is responsible to an electorate is regarded as the panacea. It celebrates a form of popular coup d'etat while downplaying the fact that all too often the interest groups that gain office by such means start to misappropriate resources for themselves and govern in corrupt and repressive ways. Without ongoing resistance that builds new institutions from below, there is no genuine democracy, at least not in the sense that radical critics of constitutional democracy, such as Gandhi, have understood it." From this perspective, Hardman states, what matters most is the ongoing process of nonviolent struggle rather than any superficial victory. In this, creating a fair and egalitarian society can never be brought about by capturing only the higher echelons of power. Is rather something that has to be continuously recreated through people addressing the various problems that confront them in assertive ways, which may include protest. Generally speaking, we're not inclined to think of biophilic design as being a kind of protest. Similarly, when we reflect on why Gandhi stands out as one of history's greatest resistors, we're unlikely to think about the work he did promoting the self-sufficient village republic. These points indicate a serious deficiency in how resistance work is commonly understood. Specifically, we problematically assume resistance has to involve a direct and dramatic reaction to what others are doing. I maintain that a better, more fruitful understanding is one which recognizes that the genuine targets of resistance exist in a category more expansive than just the world outside of ourselves. This category also includes our own individual selves. Resistance, in other words, should be understood as applying not only to the actions and commands of despots, but also to the innermost tendencies we all have that hamper our resolve to create the kind of independent egalitarian societies mentioned above. In the program I notes, for instance, there's this great quote from Rosa Parks. "I have learned over the years that when one's mind is made up, this diminishes fear." Okay, this is along the lines of what I'm trying to get at here. This understanding resonates with Gal Beckerman's description of the dissident. Okay, in his just published book, How to Be a Dissident, Beckerman, in contrast to the idea that being a dissident primarily involves taking a political stance, writes, being a dissident means trying to close the distance between what you believe and how you act. It means understanding the conditions that allow you to be yourself and not accepting any violation of them. And it means doing all this when there are great risks involved. You feel you cannot do otherwise. Whether someone can develop the kind of character Beckerman speaks of seems to be independent of what kind of policies the government they live under has imposed. This point is clearly implicit in Gandhi's further counsel to would-be social reformers that our public workers must set about the reforming of society by reforming themselves first. Elsewhere, Gandhi declares that the creation of self-sufficient villages would actually make civil disobedience unnecessary. Okay, now I'd like to discuss when acts of resistance, even when they're seemingly directed toward what others are doing, when they're primarily understood, though, as a means for reforming oneself instead of changing others, promising implications follow. Okay, this understanding enables us to notice insights that often go unnoticed. By reconceptualizing our understanding of resistance in the way suggested by Negrin and Gandhi, we can move away from the problematic assumption that acts of resistance have importance only insofar as they can bring about tangible change in the world around us. It seems to me that the purpose of resistance can be better seen by emphasizing its role in our own character development. When the great 20th century activist A.J. Must was asked by a reporter if he really thinks his actions are going to change America's policies, he replied, "Oh, I don't do this to change the country. I do this so the country won't change me." In elaborating on her conception of quiet resistance, philosopher Tamara Fakari echoes Must's sentiment when she cites the kind of resistance that Frederick Douglass engaged in. Fakari states, Douglass's love of knowledge provided him with reason to resist, even when the prospects of lessening the injustices around him, for instance via protest or expressions of outrage, were bleak. By focusing primarily on his own inner quest for growth instead of trying to change the world around him, Douglass exemplified exactly the kind of resistance that I take to have the highest value. When we value acts of resistance only insofar as we see them as effective political tools, not only are we liable to get needlessly discouraged, but we become less capable of realizing our own freedom to create the kinds of communities that we do not actually need permission from others to build. To be free, we do not so much need for others to change, even though it's true that resisting what others do can make us more capable of overcoming the existing limitations within ourselves that actually are the greatest impediments to us achieving our potential. Thus, we can make sense of Sartre's declaration that I've mentioned before in this congregation, that never were we so free than under the German occupation. Okay, as a result of living under the occupation, the French people felt forced to engage in overt acts of resistance that made their actual existence as free beings all the more obvious, at least to Sartre. This fact notwithstanding, it would be absurd to suggest that it was in any way necessary for the French to live under occupation so that they could truly be free. Similarly, I maintain that it does not make sense to think it is necessary for others to act in unacceptable ways, for us to live lives that manifest the true value of resistance. Instead, as existentialists, it would seem that what matters the most whenever we engage in resistance is that we're freely acting to create our own characters in ways we want, and not that we're successfully changing the world around us. So other great existentialists, Albert Camus argued, even if we're like Sisyphus and cannot escape the fate we're given, no matter how many times we try to roll that proverbial boulder over the hill, we can nonetheless approach this seemingly futile task with the kind of character that makes what we're doing worthwhile, to us at least. As members of an existentialist community, we ought to agree that if our individual acts of resistance can play some role in helping others realize and affirm their own nature as free beings, then they actually have the highest importance. This is the case regardless of which candidates we might get elected or which policies we help become law. Regarding the activism and protest movements we see around us, there has surely been much to be encouraged by in recent times. It would seem, however, that there could be more of a realization among present-day activists and protesters that resistance should not depend on what others are doing, that it does not have to be reactive in that way, and that it has a value that goes beyond whatever outcomes can be attributed to it. These are realizations that would actually seem to enable the work of resistors to be more effective. After all, they would move us away from being people who only feel motivated to truly do valuable work when a sense of crisis is upon us, and also provide a kind of inoculation against those defeatist tendencies that seem to go hand in hand with overly focusing on tangible results. It's my hope that my talk this morning can play some part by which we can reconceive our acts of resistance in exactly these kinds of positive ways. So, thank you.